comrades, welcome back to the channel, welcome back to the Nürburgring, where the news of the day is of course lap time set by Porsche Cayman GT4 RS, which is, by the way, also acknowledgement from Porsche that it is going to be the actual name of the model, because in the past we've seen the prototypes drive around, but it's the first time that we hear the name GT4 RS, so just a small tiny little detail. And although, of course, lap time is very impressive, I'm actually more impressed by the fact that Porsche has decided to communicate that particular lap time, because I have a couple of suspicions, a couple of remarks that makes me believe that the actual lap time could be significantly faster. And moreover, believe it or not, I'm going to say it, I have a couple of questions about the lap time's legitimacy. Now, before we're gonna go into all the juicy details, of course, subscribe, like, and share, but more importantly, on 27th and 28th of November, we're gonna have the very last event here at the Nürburgring, namely FIA World Rally Cross, which is also going to be the very first time here at the Nürburgring. And if you use discount code Misha20 at checkout on the Nürburgring website, you get 20% discount. I'm also going to be there, so looking forward seeing you there, meeting you there, and doing all the cool stuff. But now, let's go to the actual main topic of today's video, of course, the GT4 RS and its lap time. And before we jump into all the juicy stuff, let me tell you what has actually happened, when it has happened. So on the 17th of September 2021, I knew that Porsche was gonna have the Nürburgring Nordschleife rented to themselves to set lap times, which whatever model it is going to be, whether GT4 RS or maybe GT3 RS, the 9 and 2 gen, from 1:45 until 5 o'clock. Now, I was a bit late, so I heard the car driving already 10 to 2, and I could hear it coming down the main straight from my backyard. And then roughly 7 minutes later, I arrived at Sabine Schmidt's curve, where I saw the car crossing the finish line of its first lap. GT4. I'm gonna have friends here. At 2 p.m. and 33 minutes, the car went out again for its second lap, but interestingly enough, it did not come back. It has happened before in the past. Usually it means, well, either worst case scenario that the car has crashed, but most of the times driver makes some sort of a mistake and then realizes it makes no sense to come back and needs to pit in and to solve that issue. At 15 hours and 11 minutes, the car went out again, but this time from the so-called T13 pit lane. This meant that this was not going to be the full lap or lap record attempt, but probably something more of a checkup. And this kind of reinforced the assumption that there might have been a problem in the previous lap. 20 minutes later, at 15 hours and 31 minutes, things started to get interesting, namely a film crew appeared and started to move into my direction. Now you may ask yourself the question, how is this interesting? It was actually a phone call that I overheard from one of the crew members, and it went something along the lines of like, hey, is the car coming soon? Have the brake issues been solved? Now, of course, we can also assume that maybe he was calling some other garage and asking about the car of his wife, whether the brake issues have been solved. But I think it's more likely to assume that he was actually calling the pit lane to find out if some apparent brake issues of GT4 RS were solved and the car is about to go out again so they can start filming. 19 minutes later, at 10 to 4, the car appeared and went for its lap. To be more precise, the car crossed the starting line at 15 hours, 50 minutes and 27 seconds and the finish line at 15 hours, 57 minutes and 32 seconds. This gives us a rough time of 7 minutes 04 and a couple of milliseconds. You could expect that the car would go out for one more lap, because after all, Porsche had the track rented for 1 more hour, but 4:15, the lap timing beacons were taken away. And usually I would go home and edit a video and publish my announcement into the world that I have clocked a certain car of a certain lap time, and this is also what I did. I went home, edited the video, I also even made a thumbnail. 2 days later was ready for publication. But there were so many questions that I had that made me believe that, well, they should probably go again, because I knew that, for example, the following Friday Porsche would have the track again. Maybe they will go out again, maybe with fixed brake issues, maybe with another driver, maybe, and this is why I did not publish that video. And I also thought, you know what, they probably are going to only announce the lap time somewhere in February or March, because in the past, as history shows, Porsche usually launches these types of models around the Geneva Motor Show, or whenever the Geneva Motor Show was taking place around March. So for example, even for this year, the 992 GT3 was launched or announced in February, whereas the lap time was set last year in 2020 in September. So kind of similar scenario. But here we are. The lap time has been announced, and this is where now it gets interesting, where I want to share some of my questions and findings. Starting with my belief that the car actually can go faster. Now, some people might say, like, hey, the best mod you can do to a car is actually driver's mod. And we are allowed to ask the question, where was Lars Kern on that day? The man for the Nordschleife job. He has done multiple records for Porsche in the past. Taycan, GT2 RS, GT2 RS MR, Panamera, Cayenne, you name it. And also, of course, the very latest GT model, the 992 GT3, which he was driving together with Jörg Bergmeister, who also drove the time for the GT4 RS. I found it quite interesting to see in the press release of the 992 GT3 that Lars Kern is only briefly mentioned, who did a lap time, and then there was like quite a lot more praise towards Jörg Bergmeister. Now, don't get me wrong, Jörg Bergmeister has qualified himself as a tremendous driver. He is a better driver than I will ever be, most likely. But still, Lars was faster than Jörg, and like Fast and the Furious, Dominic Toretto used to say, it doesn't matter if you win by an inch, by or a mile, or a second or a microsecond, he is faster. You can of course argue that GT4 RS is a different car, maybe Jörg could have been faster, but still, we can ask ourselves the questions whether Lars had to call in sick for the second time for his exam this year. No, but probably maybe he was actually sick, because we saw in one of his Instagram posts that he had some issues with his back and therefore he had to miss 2 NLS races, and maybe it was also the same went for the records, and this was also my assumption that maybe he would get a chance to drive the car. Now, even if we will avoid the comparison of who is the faster driver between the two, or maybe even 3 if we take Kevin Estre into account, or maybe even Laurens Vanthoor, or you name it, we cannot deny that this was far from being a clean lap. And the question is, of course, was it due to the earlier brake failure, and has the brake failure been fixed, and what kind of brake failure was there? Was it ABS acting funny or overreacting, going into so-called ice mode and preventing the driver from braking? Was there loss of brake pressure? We don't know, but have a look for yourself. You could of course say that either the driver or the car are nervous, but I think actually there's indeed something wrong with the brakes when you look into data logging and the way that the car is braking, and the way driver is actually overcompensating by inducing liftoff oversteer. Quickly, what is liftoff oversteer? The car is like a bike or a bicycle. When you accelerate, more grip goes on the rear wheels, especially if it's a rear-wheel drive car. You have more traction. When you brake or lift off the throttle, it goes more on the front and you have more grip on the front. So when you lift off, you can, well, induce more grip on the front tires to go over into the corner. But the issue here is, of course, the danger. If you lift off too much, the car can, well, you know, lift off oversteer and go into the barrier. So I think this is what's happening, but this is something that you shouldn't have. Smoothness is the key to be fast, and this is something also what I did by comparing the other cars. So what I did was comparing 4 different onboards: the GT4 RS driven by Jörg Bergmeister, the GT4 MR driven by Christopher Breuer, the GT3 RS MR driven by Kevin Estre, and GT2 RS MR driven by Lars Kern. Four different cars, kind of similar cars, kind of different cars, still Porsche, also four completely different drivers. But one thing was apparent, the GT4 RS was the most nervous one. This aside, it is more interesting to compare where the lap time differences come from. The easiest way is to compare speed, namely the top speed and cornering speed. I'm not going to include the whole lap analysis in this video, otherwise it will be over an hour long. For now, let's take 3 sections per scenario. For top speed, let's start with Schwedenkreuz section. The GT4 MR manages to achieve 252 km per hour, while the GT4 RS goes significantly faster, namely 274 km per hour, which is even higher than the GT3 RS MR, which does 271 km per hour. The GT2 RS MR manages to hit even 300 km per hour. Same scenario occurs in other sections. For example, in Kesselchen, the GT4 MR goes to 128, 252 for the GT4 RS, 251, which is again slower than the GT4 RS for the GT3 RS, and the GT2 RS goes up to 280 km per hour in Kesselchen. And then finally the most obvious one, the main straight of Döttinger Höhe. 244 for the GT4 MR, 266 for the GT3 RS MR, 275 for the GT4 RS, and finally 308 km per hour for the GT2 RS MR. It is obvious that the GT4 RS would be faster than the GT4 MR, due to the increased horsepower and most importantly different gearbox ratio. It is interesting to see that the GT4 RS is also faster than the GT3 RS MR, but this has to do with big aero differences and therefore more drag on the GT3 RS MR. The GT2 RS MR does not care about your drag. The next comparison would be the lowest cornering speed. Again, there is continuous relation among the 4 cars, and surprisingly the GT4 RS is slowest of them all, followed by the GT4 MR and the 911 models. The difference between the GT4 models is sometimes even more than 10 km per hour per corner. We can of course argue that the higher cornering speed of the GT4 MR has to do with modified Manthey racing suspension on the car over the stock suspension on GT4 RS. However, GT4 MR was running Cup 2 and 1 tires, whereas GT4 RS has the Cup 2R tires. So I still do believe that there is definitely room for improvement in that particular lap time, whether it had to do again with the brake failures or the way the car was driven, but this is something that you can speculate in the comments. And then finally, at the beginning of this video, I said that I also had questions about the legitimacy of this lap time. Now, this was also the reason why I did not publish my first video to announce the lap time ahead of the manufacturer. But for some people it might be far-fetched, but it became to me more apparent today when the pictures, the press release pictures were published. And I need to kind of word it correctly, but if I would work in PR department for a manufacturer and if I would release those pictures, I'm pretty certain I would get yelled at, unless it was the actual purpose to release those very bad pictures. Now, what does it mean bad? Because you cannot see the details of the car. The shots are taken facing the sun, thereby it's most the silhouette, and then some angles of the car have been retouched. And there's one particular detail that I believe that really Porsche wants to hide from us, or at least this is my belief and assumption. And that detail, let me grab the GT3 RS, although Mark II model, is over here. By the way, quick flex of Kevin S3 signature. But here, those louvres in the fenders, which were firstly introduced in the 911 Gen 1 model. The thing is that they are made for the downforce. You may ask yourself the question, how can these small vents generate downforce, because it's not a wing? Well, basically a wheel works as a fan. As it's rotating, it generates air, and inside the wheel arch it creates lift because the air wants to go out. If you have some extra space or a hole for the air to escape, the air will escape and there will be no pressure from underneath, and the car will have more downforce. This is how. Now here comes the interesting part. Why would Porsche actually not be proud about those louvres and actually publish those very bad quality pictures instead of something like this, where you can actually see that those louvres are there, but there is something like a duct tape applied over them. Now some of you might say like, yeah, so what? You cover them with duct tape, so you actually take away the downforce, so it's actually even worse, more disadvantage for the car. Not exactly. The thing is, back in 2015, when the first models of the Gen 1 GT3 RS, or Gen 1 of 911 generation, were being delivered, many drivers started to complain that the car is scraping in high compression, high speed sections such as Steve Garden, Foxhole, etc. And thereby the inner liners, the inner fenders, and also the gutters were being destroyed. Even the indicators, the side indicators, were being destroyed. Ask any GT3 RS or GT2 RS driver, the first mod that you need to do on your car, except for the alignment, is taking out the inner arch lining or the gutters from the wheel wells or the wheel arches, so you will not have that particular issue, because otherwise your tire will rub and you might even have a blowout at very high speeds. For example, you can clearly see it on our GT2 RS MR. Over here in those louvres, usually there's a mesh, but it has been taken out, like pretty much on all the RS models, to avoid rubbing. And long story short, if this is indeed the case, that the scenario is repeating itself or actually is still ongoing since 2015, that now the GT4 RS has those louvres, but actually they do not work on the Notchschleife and you have to cover them up and get rid of the downforce, then this is not a production spec anymore, so the whole lap time becomes completely irrelevant. So I guess at this point the only way to find out is wait for the customer deliveries cars and see how they will perform in their stock form and whether it's going to be the same case scenario like with the 911 models. The time will only tell. Or, of course, maybe if Porsche could come up with a press release and a statement, would be great. Now, for some of you, you might also ask the question, how is this relevant? Why do you even care? Because this is not a lap record, it's just a lap time. But still, lap times do sell cars. And if you are going to spend 150,000 euro, probably that the car is going to cost, and you're going to think like, okay, am I going to spend it on that and I want to drive it on the track? Or on something like AMG GTR Pro, which would maybe cost slightly more, but you would base your purchase only on a lap time, but in reality, the actual marketed or advertised lap time is not true for that specific model, then it's not really cool. Let's call it that way. So it's been a very long video, it's been a very late video, sorry for that, I had different kinds of priorities. What do you think? I mean, what do you think of the lap time? Do you think I'm over-exaggerating? Do you think I'm just a Lamborghini fanboy or AMG fanboy? Because whenever I put other manufacturers' lap times in doubts or in questions, everyone's yelling, okay, you're just a Porsche fanboy. Alright, on that note, thanks for watching, wishing you a great evening and looking forward to seeing you in tomorrow's video when something Nürburgring related. So see you then, bye bye.